Welcome to the Addiction Solution Podcast. I'm Michelle Dunbar. Enjoy listening and watching as addiction experts Mark Sheeran and I cover controversial as well as helpful topics on addiction, how to move past it, and other related subjects. As two of the co-founders of the Freedom Model, Mark and I will give you a completely new perspective on the topics that matter to you. We will take to task the Recovery Society's lies and misinformation and replace them with facts, research, and the methods to move on from addiction struggles without 12-step meetings, rehabs, and the shackles of endless recovery. Let's escape the treatment and recovery trap together and learn. Hey, everyone.
All right. So today we're going to talk. Hi, everybody. So we're going to talk about something that's interesting. It's a very nuanced conversation. And that is the topic is going to be about kindness.
Yes.
And caring about the people around us and what that means. But also, you know, there's a lot of talk these days about narcissism and I see it at my feed all the time because obviously what we do, the algorithm picks up on all kinds of human behavior discussions.
Yeah.
And
relationships.
And
there's tons of relationship stuff on my feed.
And so there's this idea also that, you know, you have to let some relationships go that are unhealthy or toxic relationships. And narcissism and how to deal with a narcissist. And I've talked about this before, but there's this real hyper focus on creating boundaries, right? And how to do that and what that means. There's also a hyper focus now on being gaslit, what that means and how to address it. But here's, I want to really talk about this because I think there are sometimes situations that get really confusing. Like, let's say, and I'm going to frame this out and then Michelle can jump in because she has some ideas as well. Let's say that you're in a tough marriage, in a real tough spot with somebody who has a difficult personality. Maybe you do, maybe they do, maybe the both of you do.
I was going to say, maybe you do and you don't recognize it.
That's true. That's really true. And so it gets you. There's such a presence in social media to basically leave that situation because it's quote unquote toxic, and it may be toxic. It may be difficult. It may be borderline violent. Maybe a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing. But you stay for a reason. And there may be some love there. There might be some attention that you're seeking that is of value to you. The point is, if you're in a situation that's really difficult, barring, of course, your safety. I'm not talking when somebody's safety, genuine safety is in question. That's when in my book, you leave. Maybe temporarily till things cool down, whatever it might be, but or get a divorce or whatever. So if we're talking physical violence, that's not what this conversation is about. If that's happening, that's a different situation than what we're talking about. Okay. I think that's obvious that you should go if your safety is in question. Barring that, you can have a very volatile relationship with somebody and still love them to death. And so there's this big push and pressure to create boundaries and make that relationship perfect. And if it's not perfect, people have a tendency to feel very judged and judging themselves, and then they want to leave, and it turns into this massive, confusing yo-yo situation where you're in the relationship, you're out of it. And what I want to say about this is it's not black and white.
Ever.
Those situations are really difficult. But if the relationship is important enough where you're willing to stick it out through all this volatility, there's a reason for that. And navigating through that, because I've had relationships like that. My marriage at one time, I wouldn't say it was volatile, but it was very unfulfilling for both of us. And we had separated for a bit, and then we came back together and really fixed it. And we've had a fantastic marriage ever since. So these things can be fixed. And I think it's important for people to know to not give up on certain situations because social media presence is telling you to. These sort of platitudes and these memes are guiding you in a direction that can get very confusing.
Well, and I think that can be true, not just of intimate, like marriages, like intimate relationships, like a marriage. But I think that's true with friendships too, and family relationships, siblings, where a lot of people say now that they feel isolated and lonely. And I know the last episode we did was, when people leave a support group like AA, that's their number one reason for going back to it, is because they feel isolated and lonely.
Yeah.
And why is that? And I think part of that is that there is so much on social media about what a perfect relationship should be like and how people should act with each other, and that it sets up this expectation that that there's not going to be any arguments or disagreement, or that it sets up an expectation that the other person's going to be perfectly wonderful and kind and thoughtful and considerate, and like really unrealistic expectations of human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. So when me and Michelle were talking about before this episode, we were talking about kindness and boundaries, and so because we're coming into the holidays, and there's, we are predominantly a Christian country, right? And so there's this idea of turning the other cheek, being kind, being forgiving, being loving. And then I listen on social media, and a lot of people say, yeah, I'm all those things, but I set myself up to be a doormat.
Which I have done.
Yeah.
We know that.
Yep. So this is the nuanced part of being a human being that's really difficult. And that is, when you're relationships are two sentient minds that have two completely different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And if the two sentient minds agree on a topic, it's wonderful. That can be awesome. But most of the time we see things from a little bit of a different perspective, and we're going to see it from our own perspective. And then we want to be heard. And we also want the other person to understand. And a lot of times, in my case, I brought my own baggage of kindness and my skewed view of it into certain situations, the way I corresponded with people. Let me give you an example. I would assume that if my wife said something to me that was a criticism of any kind, that she was saying I was a bad guy.
Right.
Boy, and I'll tell you, when you take it from, she's saying something like, you didn't.
I really wish you would do this.
Yeah. To, oh, you think I'm a bad fucking guy.
Right.
And then I'm really pissed off, hurt, and really trying to prove to her that I'm not a bad person. Meanwhile, she just wants to be heard. So there'd be this huge disconnect based on my perception of what she was saying. So could I be kind at that moment? It took me a long time to say, wait a minute. She never said I was a bad person.
No.
But boy, oh boy, did I interpret every single criticism as that. And she had her own baggage that was very similar to mine. Actually, we have very similar backgrounds. So we were these two hyper vigilant, sort of traumatized people,
protecting ourselves.
And we would just bounce off each other. But meanwhile, there was this intense love and desire to be with each other, and deep respect that I had for her, and vice versa. And so that was the glue, the kindness that kept us together. But holy shit, man, was I the type of person that would protect my feelings at all costs, and vice versa, which really polarizes people.
And that can be misinterpreted as narcissism.
That's where I was going. That's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I guess in a way it is self-centeredness, because I am protecting myself, but it's understandable. So my wife, finally, one day, I would be almost in rageful tears, defending myself, defending my position. She's like, she has a need in that relationship, in that correspondence, and I'm not meeting it, obviously, because I'm too busy defending myself. And that becomes a no-winner. boy,
Yeah.
that is a way that you want to fucking destroy a marriage quicker than anything. That will do it. And
because what ultimately happens is the other person shuts down and distance grows. Because we had a similar situation in our marriage.
Yeah. Me and Bob had very similar upbringings, different, but the result was the same. Actually, we had very opposite, but the trauma was very similar.
And I had the same kind of needs and trauma. And so what happens is when you learn quickly, I'm not allowed to ask for things because I wasn't allowed to ask for things. I'm not allowed to, and I was the kind that I would just be kind because I wanted love so bad, right? Which is how you set yourself up. I'm still wanting.
Yeah.
I'm still kind for a reason. And you set yourself up to be hurt because it's not I don't know, a healthier way to connect. You're not connecting.
Well, here's where things go really good. So, and this is where I want to take the discussion. And that is when you're kind, and then there is understanding.
Yes.
You have to have understanding that couples with kindness. So, and that means understanding on both parts that the person is being kind, or an understanding of what the needs of the other person are. That's how you're being kind. And they are being kind by saying, you heard me. Now, when you don't have that love language, when you don't have the understanding part of what is that person trying to say,
which is the connection.
Yeah. Now, let's say that I have a need and I tell my wife or somebody, and I'm direct because I'm a very direct person. They interpret that as me being mean or caustic or aggressive because it is.
Which is what I get.
Because it is.
He and I are very similar.
Yes.
Personalities.
Yeah. And my wife is the same way. She's very forceful. So
yeah.
So if you come from a background of very direct, a direct sort of perspective or desire, when you communicate, it can really look like you're being an asshole.
Yeah.
And sometimes I am being an asshole because I'm not thinking about how other people see that
or receiving it.
Or
which you don't have any control over. Right. That's the other part of this is you can be a very assertive person. And I a long time ago realized that I could be aggressive. And I think you told me that I could be aggressive. And I tried to shift that to being more assertive with kindness. But you still can't control how somebody receives that.
Yeah. So there's a trick. I'm going to give you a little tip here. So my wife says that I've really accomplished this, which is a big deal to me. I've talked about this in some of the other podcasts, but not everybody watches all the podcasts. And it's what I call pulling a Benjamin Franklin. I call it pulling a Benjamin. And that is that Benjamin Franklin was the greatest diplomat that they see in the whole world. Now, he wasn't always like that. He was a very direct, arrogant, well, they saw him as arrogant, but what he was direct and super smart.
Yeah.
And one of the founding fathers at the time said, Benjamin, you have a lot of good things to say, but nobody listens to you because you're kind of a dick about it. And you don't always have to be right. And at that moment, it was a big moment in Benjamin Franklin's life because he said, I haven't been successful at this diplomacy thing. So he became the greatest diplomat because what he did, which was really smart, it's very hard to do initially, is he would go into a situation knowing what the answer was. And genuinely, he was smart enough that most of the time he was right. But he never came at it from that perspective anymore. What he did was he would always find something in the conversation to begin with that they had in common and that he could agree with. Even if the opposing party was trying to get something from him, was a scoundrel, was trying to rip him off, he would still disarm them with, you know what? I agree with that part. What you just said, I agree with. And that immediately, when another party hears that you understand their perspective, all the guard goes away. And I started not manipulatively, not strategically. I think in diplomacy, that's what it is. But with my relationships, I started listening. What could I agree with? Because I hated the conflict. I caused conflict everywhere I went because I was a contrarian. I was defending myself. I was such a fucking dick about things because I was scared. And so I started to calm down and say, what could I agree with? And especially with my wife, because she was so important to me. And then it really made our conversation. And then she started to do that. She's like, she recognized it. I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I disagree, but I'm going to tell you that I agree with that, and that. And I'd watch her shoulders would slope. She'd get calm. And I go, holy fuck. That's kindness.
Yes. And you know what's interesting is we communicate for a living.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is what we do when we do coaching, and it's easy. It's easy to do in our chosen profession with the people we work with.
It's true.
And
because they can't hurt you.
Exactly. There's no, but yeah, you can be completely vulnerable without worry because it's a different situation. Which is why even, people in behavioral health and the mental health field don't have really great track records in their interpersonal lives because it's a whole different thing when it's an interpersonal relationship with somebody that, not that the people don't matter to us, but with somebody that you're ultimately vulnerable with, right?
Somebody that you care their opinion of you.
Yes, exactly.
When I have a customer, I walk into that knowing my place is not to have anything really. We
don't want anything from them.
Yeah.
There's no expectation.
There's no expectation, and I don't even know them.
Right.
So I'm more interested in knowing them, which causes a massive trust to be built. So I'm basically just asking questions because can you imagine if you walked into this is a coaching lesson, right? If I have coaching, I spend an hour and a half asking questions about this person's personal life, building a puzzle and trying to understand them. Can you imagine walking into the kitchen after a long day of work, and sitting with your spouse or your kids and asking an hour and a half of questions about, tell me about that. Tell me about that.
Yeah.
Really so I can understand. Boy, I tell you, your relationships, they change.
Totally.
I started doing that not an hour and a half because my wife would be like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, no, that'd be a lot.
Yeah, she'd be like, you're being weird.
You know all this stuff already.
Yeah, why are you being weird? But I do when my kids call, when I'm listening.
Yes.
And I'm trying to listen because I am a talker, dude. And I am a bull in a china shop, and I will bull you over. So I have to really concentrate on being kind.
Yeah.
On being kind.
And listening.
Yeah.
That's such a great point because here, we're next week, this is going to be released just before Christmas. So next week is Christmas in the Christian faith, and every other faith has their own version of the holidays right around the winter solstice. So a lot of times you're going to be with people that you've known your entire life. You're going to be with siblings, you're going to be with parents. And I think one of the best Christmases that I remember was one of the last Christmases I spent with my grandmother, and sitting and asking her stories I had heard before, right? But asking her about how she met my grandfather and what it was like when she, had my aunt who was her oldest, and like stories. These people want to tell you their stories, and it's sometimes hard when we're with like my dad is in his 80s and he'll tell us the same stories over and over again. And, half of them probably aren't true. They're embellished. He has kind of a way of that. Right. And he doesn't remember a lot anymore, but they love reminiscing.
Yes.
And so sitting and asking someone questions, even if you know the answers to them, and getting involved in a conversation, that's kind.
Yeah, it is. It is kind. And so the whole point of this conversation we're having here is to say it's not one dimensional. Kindness and you don't have to flop from being a really good person to being a doormat.
No.
And there's a lot of space in between where there's common ground with human beings. Now, if there's a relationship that's wholly unfulfilling, the person has contempt for you. I've seen those relationships turn around too, with kindness and truth and directness, but at the same time listening. And if both parties are just willing enough to listen just a little bit, you'll watch that relationship get closer and closer, and it's friendships, it's whatever. But if the contempt is too great, those are the ones where you just say, you know what?
I did my best.
I did my best, and it's time for me to move on. There's just no grounds for us to have common ground here. But you'll know when that happens. You will know. And those are the painful conversations, or the ones where there's nothing to say. You just kind of look at the person like there's nothing to say anymore.
Well, I mean, sometimes it comes right down to it, and it's like, maybe we just don't really like each other all that much.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we just don't have a lot. You don't have much in common. We disagree vehemently about certain things. And I'm not talking about just politics or anything like that, because I've known couples that were married that were on opposite sides of the spectrum and had great marriages. So it really does just depend on people and who they are. But I do understand also, ending a relationship for the betterment of both parties.
Mm-hmm.
That and you'll know when that happens. Like for me, I've chosen to keep people in my life that in the past were abusive to me. And if they were still abusive to this day, they wouldn't still be in my life. Right?
Yeah.
But I value the relationship, and this person needs me now. And other people have chosen not to be in his life. But I had to really, go within my mind and be like, why am I doing this? Is it out of guilt? Is it out of obligation? It's not out of guilt anymore. There's no guilt left there. There is some obligation. There is some of that, but it's really based on the fact that no, it makes me feel good to help this person in this way.
Right. So obligation is a funny word because it doesn't actually exist. There is no such thing as obligation. There is just people freely doing what they want to do when it's hard.
Because they believe it has value.
Yeah, but it's hard.
Right.
And that's why we give it the title obligation. If it wasn't hard, you'd just say it was fun, right? You'd say, I really enjoy this person. But a lot of times with obligation, what you're saying is, I would rather help this person, even though it's really fucking hard to do so, rather than not do it. It would hurt me more to not do it. Now, if you're somebody that does it purely out of guilt, or the vast majority of that relationship is based on guilt, what that tells you is that you feel bad about yourself, and you feel like your definition of love is that you have to give until it hurts. Yeah. And that's that can be very painful,
for sure,
and counterproductive. And you can be hurting yourself by doing that, which then you have obligation coupled with guilt because you don't feel you're worthy of somebody's love. So you're trying to get it from somebody who's abusing you. That's not what we're talking about. If that's the case, you have some shit you got to deal with yourself. You have to ask yourself, why? Why do I feel like I need to beg for people's love? There came a point in my life where my pendulum swung from begging and begging and begging for love and being abused horribly, physically, sexually, every which way, to not needing anybody and cutting out every single person, being violently alone. I mean, just completely alone, totally for self-protection, was even homeless, wouldn't go home, and then slowly having people enter my life. And it took me 20 years to walk out of those two swinging patterns, from I would be in relationships where people abused me, to no relationships and being completely alone and isolated, to, well, maybe I can figure this out. The middle ground is is the weird place where relationships sit, and half of them are a little bit ugly, but there's a lot of love mixed in.
Yeah.
And that's where we all are sitting. But on the far edges are the hermit who gave up and said, fuck people. I hate people.
Yep.
And
I'd rather be alone.
I'd rather be alone. And cheers to them.
Yeah.
I'm not
for
one
sure.
of, I'm not
Don't
one of
judge
them.
it.
I'm not one of them. I'm also not somebody that's going to beg for people to pay attention to me.
Me neither.
You know, and that fucking hurt, you know, as a kid. And I picked women that did the same thing to me, you know, all through my 20s. So there came a point where I figured that out. I was like, wait a minute, there's probably some middle ground here that is really muddy. I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. I'm just going to kind of wallow into a relationship, see if it feels right, be kind, be direct, and learn to listen. And if I get those three things back in some degree, I'll continue to work with that person. Well, in that, I've let probably 10 relationships go, and I've kept 3 or 4, and they're my tight friends. And we work and we say mean shit to each other. We have bad days and say dumb things, and we, you know, but
not so much anymore.
No, yeah,
I think we've matured quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think we know each other and we trust each other, and we want to be kind.
I mean, that's it. There comes a point where you make a conscious decision to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Part of being kind in a relationship is not assuming the worst in the other person.
Yeah, that's huge.
Okay. And I think that was, for me, the hardest thing to overcome in my marriage and in my friendships was not as, if you're with somebody that loves you, then a lot of my assumption when Bob would do something that I was like, and it's funny because what do you do when that happens, when your husband does something that you deem as horrible and hurtful, and you call your best girlfriend and you go and you say, this is what he said to me. And your best girlfriend does what she's supposed to do. And she says, that son of a bitch, what a piece of shit. Right. But then you kind of talk through it. And I have to say, Danielle will say, I don't think he meant what you thought. Right. Like what if you interpreted that in a way that he didn't intend it?
Well, I think if you come into a conversation already wounded and you're constantly basing your current conversation based on the past, you're already 50% to the exchange being shitty.
Yeah.
Because now you're going to look for red cars, and you're going to see, and my God, are you going to see red cars
everywhere? And
yeah, I do it all the time. If I talk to any one of my kids or anybody that I'm close to, and I can see that they're tense and things like that, and then I'm going to go see them, I'm like, oh fuck, here we go. And then I go, wait a minute.
Right.
Wait a fucking minute. Only thing I can control is me. I do care about these people because I've proven to myself that I actually give a shit. And I don't need my boundaries with these people.
Right.
I don't need boundaries. I want you to hear what I'm saying. I don't need boundaries. What I need to do is figure out what they're going through, because they're worth it to me. Now, there's other people that I have that same thought with, and I go, put up your fucking boundaries, because I don't need to be near this person.
Right.
I don't want their shit on me. I don't want any of what's going on. I'm good with, you know what? I'm not going to their house tonight.
And that you make a conscious decision, right? Mm-hmm. You make a conscious decision. I can remember probably 15 years ago, maybe a little less. I was like, you meet people and you pick the people you're going to be close to, and it's a choice. And then you learn more about them, and then you have to keep making that choice. It's like, is this the person? Is this my person? Is this part of my tribe? And ultimately it's a choice. But when you make that choice, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. I am going to be there for this person no matter what. Now, when I say no matter what, he already qualified.
Right.
If somebody's beating the crap out of me, stealing from me, all that stuff, they're out. I do have those boundaries, right?
Yeah, there's obvious
There's
boundaries.
obvious boundaries. But beyond those things, like you're either like you either make a commitment or you don't. And I like when I would, work with people who were either getting married or in difficult marriages. The word commitment is in marriage for a reason. It's a reason, because if it were easy, you wouldn't need that word.
Yeah.
And
people are fickle.
They're fickle. And one of the things I think when I was going through a difficult time in my marriage that Mark would say to me all the time, he's like, no matter what, just be kind. No matter what, just be kind, which is super easy to say and really difficult at times to remember.
I'll tell you what really helped me. There was another little tool in my marriage and in my relationships and in my friendships. So that's the idea of teamwork.
Yes.
I remember when money was tight. It's tight now. And that can be frightening in any relationship, especially a marriage with kids. And if I knew that my wife had my back, I was golden and my performance at work skyrockets. And I told her that. I said, listen, I know it's rough right now. And she, being an entrepreneur and somebody that founds companies and just does what I want to do, there are lean times and there are windfall times.
Yep.
And sometimes that can be a 5 to 10 year swing. So this isn't a small commitment on my part or my wife's and kids. And so I was always open about what was going on in the businesses and things like that. And I would say to my wife, are we a team? We'd have tense conversations about money and I'd say, are we a team? And she'd say, yes, we're teammates. And man, that just,
that was huge.
Takes the fucking heat right down. And huge. Now I got a teammate who's willing to go through fire with me. And it meant the world. And I said, you need to know that I will perform 10 times better if I know that you got my back. And I see guys building companies, doing things, having careers, and their wives are not on the same team.
Yeah.
And vice versa, the husbands as well. And that's freaking brutal. You want to talk about creating misery.
For sure.
If there's no teamwork, you're done.
Yeah. But it's almost impossible
because life's too hard.
It's almost impossible to be a parent and not be a team.
Yeah.
And I think the first, until my oldest one was like 10 years old, I continuously terribly undermined my husband. And we were not a team in that respect because of my wounds that I brought to the relationship from my childhood and his wounds that he brought from his childhood. We had no idea how to be effective parents until we came together and we're like, no, we got to be a unified front. And maybe he wasn't quite, maybe he was like 8 years old. When they're babies, it's kind of easy. But boy, you got to get your shit together before they become teenagers or you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yep.
It makes a world of difference. Even if you're divorced, it makes a world of difference to be a team.
Yeah.
My parents got divorced and they were not a team.
And I think that life is hard enough. If you don't need to be a team, if you're in a relationship with somebody that is inconsequential.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with just interacting with people, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the relationships that are long-standing and you need that teamwork sort of imagery in your mind. This person's got my back. In relationships that are, business, career, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's great to have teamwork or whatever. But the truth of the matter is that's more just about knowing people's needs, not getting backed into a corner and not defending yourself and being open and pulling a Benjamin and finding common ground. And if you're the person that can do that and not be hurt by everything that everybody says and not be on defense and and let me tell you something, I had this in spades. I was so freaking frightened of people's thoughts about me.
Me too.
And I really honestly believe people are out to hurt me. And I didn't even realize it. And it's why I was so unfulfilled. So I had to let go. Sometimes you have to let go and be like, I'm just going to be kind. We're just going to be kind. But lastly, if you are the doormat, if you're the person, you have to look at, why do I feel like I need to beg and perform for love?
Right.
And if that's the case, you're probably picking people that you need to beg from. I did because it was more natural for me to be around people that forced me to beg. They didn't force me to, but I volunteered to beg. But I sought those people out, and I was recreating my past over and over. I had to let that go. I had to be cognizant of it. I had to be like, wait a minute, I'm not going to beg. And if I didn't beg, did they go away? And yes, 90% did. 10% stuck around. And what I found is, oh my God, when I stopped begging, there was 1 in 10 that was like, Mark, I like you for who you are.
Right.
Stop being like that. You don't have to do that with me. And I was like, oh, but those 9 other people, they left my life very quickly. When I no longer performed and tap danced, gone.
That's so true. That happened to me too.
Yeah.
So we wish everybody happy holidays, and we hope that this discussion will be helpful for you to have a wonderful time with your family as you see them this holiday season.
All right, everybody. Have a great holiday season. Take care.